I never thought it was going to be such a challenge to make the Sax-Keys that go across the top of Robby's head. Well, it was. If you want to just see the final solution, you can skip ahead to the end of the video and see what I wound up using, which was electroplating with copper and with nickel. But before that, I'm going to show you the redesign of the key itself. The first technique I tried, which was a spray-on chrome paint, and then we'll move on to what the solution that worked for me, my adventure in learning how to electroplate 3D prints. Let's talk about the design of the key itself. There are a couple of designs floating around out there, and they basically have kind of a flattish shape to them. It didn't quite look, from the pictures I have that I took when Robby was up for auction, it didn't look quite accurate to me. And the other issue I had is that it's very light. It's even if you print it with a large amount of infill, it's just very light, and I just didn't want to kind of, jittering around inside, Robby's head when theoretically that's going to be a suit that I can wear around, right? So I didn't want this jittering around. Now, I was lucky enough to also have from Norm Sockwell this metal cast of a key, which I believe is based on the original Robby, or came from the original Robby. And this has a little bit more of an organic shape to it. Now, the other thing is, this thing is heavy. I don't know what he cast it in, but it is metal. And my concern here was that I believe Norm's keys are meant for more of a static build. So they would look fine on display. But if this was actually to be motorized and moving up and down, I was afraid it might damage the beautiful sax wrists that I documented in another video. And there's a couple other issues. If you look at the original Robby, the keys are probably the shiniest part of Robby's whole, body. And so I'm not sure, again, what metal this was cast in, but I don't really think that this could be polished to a mere shine. And so one of the goals was to get something that was a little bit more true to the original form, a little bit heavier to be, just a little bit more stable, but not too heavy. And the final goal was to make it as shiny and beautiful as the original Sax-Keys on Robby. Armed with that sample piece from Norm Sockwell and a lot of reference pictures I took from the Robby auction, I dropped over into Fusion 360 and designed my own replica key, which I think is fairly close to the original. But I discovered when I printed this key out that it suffered the same issue from the other models that are out there, in that it was too light and too flimsy. So I decided to try a couple other approaches. One of them was to make this hollow version. Let's see, this one. And what this version has is a slot inside. So my thinking was, okay, you could print this on a resin printer, you could, or FDM, and you could insert some weights into the middle, and then maybe, Bondo or Tamaya putty over this and sand it down, and so the key would be a little bit heavier. And that's might have worked. I chose to do a slightly different approach than that. This key it's showing here in transparent, that actually has two hollow pieces, and you can sort of see those sections. Now let's hide the one behind it here. And so the idea here is that this is only for FDM, not for resin. But while you're printing it, and I printed in this orientation, so when it gets to around here, I pause the print and I insert some weight, and then I let it go a little bit further up and seal that piece in. And when it gets to around here, I pause the print again and I insert another lead weight in here, and that makes the key just heavy enough to feel substantial. But not so heavy that maybe as it's clacking up and down it actually damages anything or strains the motor. My first thought when I paused the print to add some weight was to use my favorite brand of sinker, and this is not a paid endorsement, Eagle Craw.
The craw?
Oh, not the craw, the craw.
Oh, yes, the craw.
eagle claw, claw, to use the sinkers to hammer them out and to drop the little pieces in, and maybe use some CA glue or some UV resin to sort of hold them in place. I didn't have a lot of luck with that approach. Not sure if you can hear that, but they sound a little bit like, maracas. So I decided instead to use some egg sinkers and hammer those out instead, and use those in two parts. So just two sinkers that I would wedge in there a little bit carefully. Another thing I did when I was hammering the sinkers out and sort of cut them to fit the shape is I 3D printed this little tiny piece, which is the shape of it's the shape of the opening inside the arm here, inside the inset. So it just makes it easy to cut a piece that's just about the right size. And you want to be very careful when you're pushing those pieces in, because you've paused the print. You want to make sure you have good bed adhesion, and you want to push hard enough so that the sinker is wedged in there so that it's not going to rattle, but you don't want to push so hard that you move or dislodge the print, because obviously then it's throwaway at that point. So you want to be very careful, push them down there very carefully, and then continue the print, and then move on to sanding and finishing. Once your print is finished, it's time for some good old surface prep. I start with 150 grit sandpaper, work my way up to 220, then wet sand with 320, put on a coat of spray primer, repeat the process a couple of times until I get a smooth, perfect finish. Whether you're going to spray on chrome paint or spray on a nickel conductive paint for electroplating, the smoothness of these layers is crucial to getting a good final product. So don't neglect a little bit of hard work in this step. It will pay off down the road, and it will make sure you get a quality final product. In my first attempt to get that nice chrome finish on my replica Sax-Keys, I put a little bit of the Molotow liquid chrome mirror effect paint in the cup of my airbrush, and I just gently sprayed it on, trying to find the best distance to get the right coverage. And you can see, even as I'm putting it on, it's a little bit wet, it does have a nice chrome finish, but I was having a really hard time getting good, consistent results with this paint. Ultimately, I got mixed results from using the chrome paint. The spraying it on, sometimes it would cure and I would get a super shiny, almost reflective, silvery chrome finish. And sometimes it would cure a little bit cloudy. You can't put a gloss paint over it. It only gets a gloss coat over it. It only gets duller. I noticed after letting it dry for a week, I could still push a thumbprint into it, and that concerned me a little bit. Was it going to be durable enough inside my Robby? And I had just installed, on a whim, I said, let me install the 6 keys across the top and see what it looks like. And I came back a couple of days later, I lifted up one of the keys and it left a little mark on one of the sax rests. And I had to use like a Mr. Clean magic eraser to take it off. It didn't come out easily. So I was concerned about ultimately this may be leaving some marks on my Robby. At the end of the day, it's not quite as shiny as the original keys. I do think it's a great solution, but looking at how shiny and chrome-like the original keys were, I wanted my reproduction to have keys that look just as beautiful as on the original Robby, so I decided that I was going to move on to the next approach, which is electroplating. To electroplate something, it needs to be conductive, which 3D prints aren't, although I would like to try and print something with the conductive filament and see if that works. In any case, what I used to coat my parts with an electrically conductive shell is this Super Shield nickel conductive paint. I'll put the links for these things in the ingredient. This is pricey. It's about $55 a can, but a little does go a long way. I put 2 coats of this on, lightly sanded in between coats. You also need to make the electroplating solution. Well, you need an electroplating solution. You can make it or you can buy it. I've seen it for sale on Amazon, eBay, and Etsy. I thought I'd like to, I don't know how much it would cost. I'd like to know what's in it and make it myself. And for the copper electroplating solution, there are a lot of recipes on on YouTube and on the web, and I tried a bunch. I'm just going to tell you the one that worked for me. Some of the other ones may work for you, and some of them don't have totally different mixtures and don't require sulfuric acid. We'll get to that in a second. But the key ingredient, ZEP root kill crystals. This is actually copper sulfate crystals, 32 ounces. 1 jar of this. 1 gallon of distilled water. Oh, and why am I not showing you the video of me making all this stuff? Because I tried making a bunch of different solutions and I didn't record them all. So I'll put the recipe in the description and you'll see me working with the solution in a few minutes here. But this is, anyway, back to where we were. The copper sulfate crystals, some sulfuric acid, aka battery acid. You could just go into your local auto parts store and buy a little bit of this. And some polyethylene glycol, otherwise known as Miralax or Clearlax. This is a smoothing agent to smooth out the finish on the part, so it doesn't just smooth things out internally, it works for electroplating as well. Just a little bit of that. And what you want to do, visualize this, is take a gallon of distilled water and bring it to a boil on the stove, get a 5-gallon bucket, dump in your 32 ounces of the ZEP root kill crystals. When the water's boiling, pour it into the 5-gallon bucket. Stir it and stir it and stir it until the copper sulfate crystals are completely dissolved. Let the solution cool. Then add 32 milliliters of the battery acid, the sulfuric acid, to that mixture. And just as a reminder, we always want to add acid into water. We never add water into acid to prevent basically a thermal reaction that might break the container. You don't want it to shatter. But in this case, we're adding 32 milliliters of the sulfuric acid into the copper sulfate distilled water solution. And once you've stirred that together and mixed it, let it cool, and that is your copper electroplating solution. Before we start plating, I've wrapped a little bit of conductive wire around here, and I've used my multimeter to test that the coat of nickel conductive spray paint that I'm on here is uniformly covering the part. So again, just use the ohm meter or a continuity tester to test a bunch of parts on the piece. Before we go ahead with the first step of electroplating, we're going to give this a little dip in a solution of 5 parts water to 1 part muriatic or hydrochloric acid. This is called an acid pickle. This will remove any surface impurities and also give the surface a light acid etch to help the copper adhere. Only leave it in here for about a minute and a half or two. You don't want to go crazy in this step. Okay, so we've got the pickled piano part right here. And this is our copper sulfate solution that we made previously. Interestingly, it's blue and the zinc is green. I would have thought if Spock taught us anything, it would have been that copper is green, but for whatever reason, I think gold is purple. I don't know how it works. Anyway, 2 pieces of relatively 99.5 whatever percent pure copper. We will just bend those in, put them over different sides of the jar that you're using. This is going to be the anode, so it's going to connect to the positive on our little power supply. And I like putting a part on opposite sides of the jar just so that the little copper ions hit the part from both sides. So I will just simply daisy chain these 2 pieces together with this little clip. So again, that's positive, very important. Then our little part, we're going to suspend in the middle, not too close to the plates. We will put that in here. See if I can show you what I'm doing here. I'm just using one of these little helping hands. You could put a little bar across the top and wrap the wire around that. So I'll try and just get that just below the surface there. And connect cathode to the wire there. Not in the solution or I'll corrode the heck out of it. And then over here, the key is low and slow, a 3-volt, 200 amp power supply. You can actually even use a couple of, a few AA batteries. I just didn't want to waste them. But and this is all, there are all kinds of formulas on the internet for calculating the surface area and the appropriate voltage. We're just winging it. So I'm going to plug this in, and it's so low and slow that we're really not going to see any bubbles forming. If you see a lot of bubbles coming off your part, that's hydrogen gas being released. And make no mistake about it, a little bit of gas is being released. This is a well-ventilated area, so it's nothing to worry about. I should have had gloves on because that is, you know, there's acid in there. And the gloves are over there, of course, where they do me a lot of good. Anyway, if you see a lot of bubbles coming off the part, you've probably got the voltage too high. And what those bubbles will do, you'll still plate it, but you'll get this like pitting and you'll get these surface defects. So low and slow, I'm actually going to give this about 4 hours, but you know, maybe if we look at it right now, if I just pull it out here for a second, you can actually see, you know, it's already got, even in just the time I was talking, a little bit of copper is already on there. So again, low and slow, 4 hours, we'll come back, we'll have a look at it. Okay, it's been about 4 hours. Let's see what the pieces look like here. Or the piece, I should say. I'll unplug the power. So, looking pretty good. Oh, let's do a quick rinse in some distilled water. Now, something I've noticed, and I think, again, it's just having to do with the magnetic field. You might get a little bit, I've gotten a little bit of fuzzing, a little bit of lines over the top here, some little ridges, which were not, those are not layer lines because the layers would go this way. So these little lines that go around these rounded edges, that's just something to do with the magnetic field. Hopefully we'll be able to sand those down a little bit. Other parts here look really great. And see, interestingly there too, those lines are actually perpendicular, if you can see them right there. Those lines are perpendicular to the layer lines. The layer line should be going this way. There's none there. And I should mention, you know, again, the rounded, I try and take the sharpness off the corners a little bit. Straight round edges also make it tough for the plating process to work. But here we are. And now the next step to do before we can nickel plate this is to, you know, take this wire off. And then we need, again, to polish it, because every subsequent coat will only be as good as the base coat that it's binding to. So I've got to get these little rough lines around the sides here out. And let's go on to the polishing step. Here's the copper cleaned up a little bit. You can actually be a little aggressive with it, and I've actually hit it with 220 grit sandpaper. Then I move on again to 320 wet sanding, and I use some Mother's metal polish. It's a chrome automotive polish. I use that with my Dremel. You just want it smooth. You can get it kind of shiny, but you don't want to be overly aggressive because it is a thin coating. So this was the Copper Electroplating Solution. This is the Nickel Electroplating Solution. What I'm using for, even though I use these two strips to make the solution with just vinegar and salt, for the actual electroplating process, I have this nickel rod that I'm going to use as the anode. So we've got that piece ready, and I'm going to put the key in. Again, it'll be in here maybe for, let's say 3 or 4 hours, and we'll come back and see how things come out. And then we'll polish it, and hopefully everything will be done. So see you in about 3-4 hours. It's about 4 hours later, so let's take it out and have a look. Little rinse here in some of the distilled water. And we need some light here. There we go. It's looking really nice. So next thing is I will polish it up, again, carefully with the Dremel, and we'll see what the final product looks like. But even straight out of the solution, it's looking Really good. All right, polishing it up here a little bit. And final result. There we go. Pretty nice. This is a quick side-by-side comparison of keys that I printed with the metallic chrome paint, that I airbrushed, versus the ones that I electroplated. So, first one, painted, electroplated, painted, electroplated. The painted ones are not bad. I think you could see that the nickel plated ones really look closer to the shiny chrome in the original Robby. If we just look at two sort of side by side here, maybe a little bit more close up, you can really see the reflection in the electroplated ones. I mean, they're both fine, right? They're both very nice examples. But you can even see me holding my phone. You can see my reflection in there. I'm just really happy with how the chrome came out. But they'll both look really nice, whichever route you decide to go. So for me, the nickel plating and polishing is the clear winner here. It's super reflective. It's durable. With the lead weight inside, it has, the heft that I wanted in the original keys, and it really does do justice to the original Robby with the nice chrome-like finish. As always, links to my files are in the description for the video. If you do decide to do some electroplating, please take all the necessary precautions and be careful. And I'll see you next time as I continue to work on my Robby replica.